chapter 7 of Isaiah. So, let me just, I'm just going to read you real quick, just the beginning, first verse. And it says, and it came into pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jonathan, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, and the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. Now, as we get into this chapter 7, on the front of your documents, that's why, as you're going to be reading them, there is a organizational information. I don't know if you got one. That way you both have one. It says, the book of Isaiah organizational notes. I need to put this together for you guys because this chapter starts the 5th discourse. You know, Isaiah's been doing his statements to the people of Judea and Jerusalem. His prophecies for 4, 5, 6 chapters, right?
Right. Different groups of people.
And at the end of the last chapter, God cleansed him, gave him grace, and then assigned him to go and say to the people of Jerusalem and to Judea, right? So it starts the 5th discourse, is what it's called. Okay. And it's delivered immediately by God. And it is very mixed and various argumentative among scholars about this because the way Isaiah is laid out, right? They say that all of this information should have been placed in the beginning of Isaiah, and we wouldn't have had to listen to the same thing over for 6 chapters. It would have made more sense, is what they're saying, right?
Do you think,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, because it didn't, because it ended up in the 7th chapter of the book,
Mm-hmm.
do you think that it was so that we would hear it again 6 different ways in case we were one of the 6 different groups that he was trying to get this across to?
I think he's appealing to 6 different cultural ideas around the world.
Would the analogy be, do you remember the parable of when they were sowing seeds?
Yes.
And then some they strew in good fertile land and it took root. Some of them they strewed in the rocks and it started to grow and it died.
Right.
Would that be because maybe different people get different messages according to what they hear?
Yeah, and what they can discern, yes. Exactly.
So maybe that's why they went the 6 different ways first.
Yes, the first 6 chapters basically were to get us familiar with what Isaiah was doing. The effort and the, I call it the fortitude to keep doing it even though they weren't listening. Does that make sense? Now, and this will help you to understand it, right? Its design is twofold. The first part of it is to confront the pious in Jerusalem, the pious people, right? Amidst the great calamity which threatened their nation, and to testify the singular providence of God towards the house of David. Now, we know that the house of David has always been what? That's where the line of Christ would be born out of the line of David, right? So we know that's not going to go away, right? Which God had protected and preserved and would continue to preserve till the completion of his great design in the end time, right? We know that. So there's 2 things that he's going to be covering here in the next 5 chapters. They're all tied together, all right? So it's 5 parts. So the first discourse part is in chapter 7, starts with verse 3 and goes through 25, okay? Now,
The first discord is 7:3:25. Okay.
7, chapter 7, verse
So you
3.
already wrote it down.
Right.
I was going to write it down.
All right. So the first part of the prophecy, which foretells the invasion of Judea by the Ephraimites, Assyrians, and Assyrians, contains a kind of introduction to the subsequent prophecies in this time period. Okay. Now, we can go through all of this, or we can just wait till we get to each chapter. It's up to you guys. But I think if you kind of get this whole picture in your head, if I had to lay it out, I could lay out 5 different books, right? And this one is about this, right? And it would be about the war and the conflict that's coming, right? And then the second one, it says the discourse is Isaiah 8:1 to Isaiah 9:7, is the same argument, right? It being prophetical and containing matter both of comfort and reproof. It may be divided in 2 parts, right? The first 4 verses contains a confirmation, a sign of the prediction concerning the sudden subversion of the kingdoms of Syria and Israel. Okay? We know that they eventually go into what? They get captured, right? Taken into slavery again.
Is that what they mean by the subversion?
Subversion, right, right. Conflict taken away. And then the second part of that is more fully and distinctly explains the purpose of God with respect both to the Israelites and the Jews for the consolation of the pious and the terror of the impious and carnal among them. So what he gets into detail there in that next chapter into 9 is he identifies them specifically. God does.
Okay, pious would be the faithful.
The humble.
Humble.
Okay, humble,
Right.
And then the
faithful.
other, the terror of the haughty and, evil.
Evil, right, or the carnal.
Yes,
yeah.
that part I got.
Okay. So then you go to the third discourse. This part is from Isaiah 9:7 to 10:5, right? And the central theme of the preceding prophecy has respect to Judah alone. Now, it's not talking about Jerusalem. It's not talking about the kings. It's talking about Judah, that country of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
What's going to happen, right? This is confirmed solely to the Israel or Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is another name for Israel, and I actually explain it in chapter 7 a little better, and we'll get into that, right? But the prophecy is divided into 4 parts, right? And each part is designed to threaten a distinct judgment on some particular prominent vice, right? Now, and like the first one says, crime. Their pride and obstination, Isaiah 9:8, is punishment. The land would be invaded by the Assyrians and the Philistines. And we're going to talk about that in chapter 9, right? Crime, they had apostatized from God, and the leaders had caused them to err, right? That's going to be the second part of that one. The third part is Isaiah is again punishment. Yahweh would cut off the chief men of the nation. So there's going to definitely be another war, right? And the chief men of the nation are going to be slaughtered. And then the fourth crime there is prevent wickedness in the nation. Again, it's a punishment, the anger of Yahweh, consternation, anarchy, discord, and want. He's going to devastate. This is almost exactly what happened in the 10 plagues of Egypt. Almost exactly the same one. Okay? Oh, that not working?
I'm good. When I put, I'm not.
No, I'm not either.
Okay.
When I plug it in, then it doesn't come on.
Am I supposed to have hot flashes or what?
All right, and the fifth one, it says, crime, prevalent injustice, the punishment of a foreign invasion and then captivity. So there's one. As we get into the sections, it's going to get very detailed, I guess is the word I'm trying to look for. Very specific, detailed. Isaiah actually tells them exactly when and who is going to be conquering him. God has given him that insight. So I can understand it's fine. His fortitude and determination to save Israel, the nation of Israel, or the nation of Judea, right? Because the more he's trying to stop the loss of people. Does that make sense? Because he wants those people that believe to become the remnant, the ones that aren't destroyed, right? And if he can save one, again, like Abraham, right? So his desire is to save everyone, and he really takes it to heart, right? Then you have the fourth discourse part is from Isaiah 10:5 to the end of that chapter, which is from 10:5 to chapter 10:34. Anyway, it's twofold again. It's a proposition in this verse, and we'll get into that, and I'll explain that when we get into that chapter. But the unfolding of it in the following verses, it is new and distinct prophecy. So that's what's kind of amazing about chapter 10. It's different than what we've heard before. Does that make sense? Okay. It foretells the invasion of Sennacherib and the destruction of his army. Now, we don't know even who that is at this time period, right? But he comes into play later as a threat against Judea, okay? The historical note has been, it must have been delivered between the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign. So Ahaz is already gone by the time this occurs. Well, we know that he's in his 4th year right now, and he reigns for 16 more years. So it's covering time periods. Does that make sense? And there's a new king, and there's new battles, and there's new conflicts. So when God removed his protection from them, which Isaiah said he was going to, we've heard it for 6 chapters? This is what's going to happen when this occurs. So it's going to go into more detail. And I think that will help clear up a lot of, why aren't they listening? You know? Well, who are the other influences that are affecting their thought process? And it really becomes almost to a point where it's no longer about the people, it's all political. Almost every bit of it's political.
Today.
Yeah, well, we're going to see it firsthand. Okay? So Isaiah therefore now turns his discourse to the Assyrians, the executors of this judgment, the executors of this judgment, who also in their time should make the same attempt against Judea. All right, so the ones that conquer first, or threaten to conquer, right? And God says no, right? Later become the ones that get conquered. Right, because they go against Judah itself. Does that make sense?
So he was trying to warn the people that were going to be under this reign.
Yes.
And now he's warning the people that have put them in this place.
Yes. Here it comes, right?
Okay, yeah.
All right. And denounces their punishment, teaching at the same time in that what light they were held by God, and consequently were to be considered by the careful observers of the ways of God. At one time, the Assyrians were followers. And then they fell away. And then they came back. All right? Sounds like the Israelites, doesn't it? It kind of depends on who's in charge. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We're either a nation under God or we're not a nation under God. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? Right?
Put it that way, yes.
Okay, you understand what I'm saying, right? So the fifth discourse is contained in the 11th and 12th chapters, every part of it. Right? So those two, when I do the 11th and 12th chapters, it will be one section. It will be continuous. It won't stop. Okay. Anyway, and it's twofold again. The first part, the kingdom of Christ, is described. That's pretty amazing, right? In what manner, arising from the smallest beginnings, it should go on to increase till at length it attains the highest perfection. He tells about how he starts out humble, almost an outcast, the mother, and
becomes ruler and king.
Right, so there's a whole complete story of Christ in Isaiah, in 10th and 11th chapter, 11th and 12th chapter, excuse me, right? And then the second part are some remarkable events of the kingdom, illustrating its glory with their consequences, right? If you follow God, what happens? You get blessed, right? And it's amazing what He can do for a nation when He wants to, right? I like to say God is the originator of the Midas touch. Everything He touches can turn to gold, can't it? Right? So
He has
that's
flair.
He has flair. There you go. I like that one. So that's the reason I wanted to go through that one. I know it's kind of lengthy, and I think we can probably put it online for people that want to have it later. I think I can just upload it to the website, right? Yeah,
I don't know.
I think so.
Or you can go into on Facebook or YouTube,
Yeah.
and go in the comments and just copy and paste it.
Oh yeah, I can do that. Okay, all right.
Then it's right there.
It's right there.
Bible study.
Well, that way, every time it's there, right? Okay. So people can, at home following or studying on their own, can pull it up and it'll help clarify some things, all right? Because if you don't see how it's laid out, it can be very confusing because you're like, he already said that.
Right.
Well, it also tells who he's talking to and the time period, right? And I think what's really neat about the 11th and 12th chapters is the people he's talking to is the remnant.
The people left back, the ones that didn't get.
Yes. Because why? Because they are from the house of David. they are that small seed that will sprout again, and it continues a line. Does that make sense? All right? So they need to have encouragement. They need to understand that that this is part of God's plan, and He explains it very well in here, okay?
Okay.
So it's going to be very interesting over the next 2 or 3 as we go through it, okay? Are you cold now? Okay. All right.
There is no getting cold.
Okay, that's true.
If I get cold, be scared.
All right. So back to chapter 7, verse 1. So it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jonathan, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, right? Now, and then it says, then Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. Okay? Now, and when it says that it came into pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jonathan, it means the whole reign of Jonathan comes between chapters Isaiah and 6 and 7. So it immediately tells us a time period. And you can go back into history and you can look at the time period, right? And it says there, he reigned between 738 years before Christ. So you can go back to 700 in history of 738 years, right, before his birth, and go, oh, okay, this is the king that was there, and this is what happened. You can actually, the Sumerians kept a good record of it. Some of the other tribes kept records of it. I can't think of the Ephraimites kept records, historical records, and it actually tells the same story, right? But in historical content, not in a biblical content. Okay. All right. It's a pretty good read, but anyway. Okay. So we know that it's a long period of time. Okay. All right. Okay. If you look at by comparison of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles.
I've got 2 Kings.
Okay. 16:5.
The Rezin king of Syria and Pekah, son of Remaliah, king of Israel, came up to Jerusalem to war, and they besieged Ahaz,
yeah.
but could not overcome him.
Okay. That's important to remember. Could not overcome him. Okay. Now you're talking about somebody that's the king over Israel, not the king over Jerusalem. Ahaz was with Jerusalem, the city and its surrounding area. It's like Israel and the Gaza Strip today. Does that make sense? Okay.
So this 2 Kings 16:5 is a historical reference.
Yes, to that.
To the Isaiah chapter 7.
Yes. Okay. Now 2 Chronicles.
Got it.
Okay.
Therefore the Lord his God delivered him into the hands of the king of Aram. The Arameans defeated him and took many of his people as prisoners and brought them to Damascus. He was also given into the hands of the king of Israel, who inflicted heavy casualties on him.
Okay. Now we
They
have
inflicted casualties, but they still did not overcome him.
many
Yep.
casualties. Yes. Right? And later in here, in just a few verses, you'll find out why. It tells us, God tells us exactly.
So this is Syria and all of Israel versus the city of Jerusalem.
Yes.
Okay.
City and the people of Jerusalem, yes.
Because I don't
Go ahead.
I don't understand why they go back and forth. They call it Israel and then they call it Ephraim when it's the same thing.
Okay.
Why don't they just pick one and keep
Okay, but if you say Ephraimites, that means those in the country outside of Jerusalem. That's why. Because at the time, Israel was considered the Jerusalem itself. Or not Israel, but the kingdom of Ahaz is Jerusalem. Because it's a major trade city, and it hundreds and thousands of people there,
Right.
right? And the king of the land,
Which is Israel.
which is Israel,
All of Israel.
was wanting to take over and kick this king out, so that he could become ruler over all the trade, and the commerce. That's
So it would, or I should say the rest of Israel.
yes, the rest of it.
Because it's still broken up by
Tribes.
the tribes in each section or state.
Each state.
Has
There
its
you
own
go.
king.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So it's a consolidation period.
So it's the United States versus Texas.
Okay, that's a good example, right? That would be pretty close to it. Pretty close to it. Okay. Same type of visual, if that helps,
Yeah.
okay? I know it's confusing, because,
Well, now that you said that the people that live in the rural areas of Israel
right,
are called Ephraimites.
Yes.
Or whatever.
right,
Yeah.
Ephraimites, yeah.
It
Okay.
explains more in verse 2, I think.
Yes, it does,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get into that. All right, so verse 2, we'll start with that, right? And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is a confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. Now, it was told the house of David. Now, who's the original house of David? That would be Ahaz.
Oh, at that.
Right, Jerusalem itself. Because where was King David's and the temple built? In Jerusalem.
Well, I thought the house of David was Judah.
It will be later. It isn't yet.
Okay.
Judah. Okay.
Yes, they keep changing the names.
Yes, they
Look
do.
what they had.
Well, and because, okay, since the time period of the 12 tribes came out of Egypt, right? And it divided the land. We know that from Deuteronomy and Numbers, right? And Joshua was in charge, right? 12 tribes, 12 different distinct areas. Jerusalem was the ones that was set up as the temple, and Aaron's offspring are here. They were all what? Priests.
Yes.
Major cultural center. Everything came to that point, right? Now the other tribes are warring against each other, trying to gain more power, more people, so they can take over Jerusalem. And and one king will go to another king and say, hey, I'll be on your side if you're on my side, and then we can conquer these people. All right, and then, and
They start playing Risk.
it's,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
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 Okay, all
I'll
right,
just get it out.
right.
Yes.
Well, because in the Amplified Bible it says, when the house of David, Judah.
Judah, right. It originally, it would be all of Judah,
Yeah,
wouldn't it?
because Aram, they say, is also Syria, David is Judah, Ephraim is Israel, which
Israel.
that explains that.
Right.
Okay. So I just,
So it's outside,
right,
so it's still part of the tribes,
right,
but Israel itself is gonna be Jerusalem,
okay.
all right?
So the tribes are all different colonies, and all
Right.
all
Yeah,
the
they're
colonies
states.
have their own traditions
yeah,
and
they
their
have
own
their own-
customs
right.
and their own,
Mm-hmm.
and they try to overtake
Right,
one.
yes.
And God has said that he would establish the house of David forever. Because it can't have Christ being born 738 years later if Jerusalem didn't exist,
Right.
Okay.
right? And because of these wars, what happens is it all becomes one nation eventually. Does that make sense? There's no more divisions, there's no more, it's all becomes under one control. And David is, if you remember the King David, what did he do? He went out and warred against the neighboring countries, Judea, and conquered them all and took and brought them all under one ruler, him. But that hasn't happened yet. So what we're seeing is the time period that's coming up to that. And Isaiah is prophesying, saying this is gonna happen.
Okay, so they're preemptively calling the house of David
Yes,
Judah.
yes.
Because that's like one of Jesus' nicknames,
Yes.
like the Lion of Judah.
The Lion of Judah, right. So, God says he's gonna preserve that because it was to be his son's,
Right, okay.
one of his son's titles, right? And that's why it's important when we get to 11 and 12, it'll make more sense, okay? All right, so, okay, Ahaz was the descendant and successor of David, did you know that? 1 Samuel 20:16.
I got it.
Oh, I don't have my,
Well,
I have my paper if you
First
need it.
Samuel,
Yeah, 2016.
16.
Mm-hmm.
So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies."
Okay, just another example. Does that make sense? So, what David, I guess if you think about it, what King David had established, they're trying to tear apart. And God's like, not going to have it, by the way. All right. Now, so at one time, okay, let's do this. Syria is a confederate with Ephraim. The meaning is that Syria was supported by Ephraim or was allied with Ephraim. That's all it means, right? The kingdom of Israel or Ephraim was situated between Syria and Jerusalem. Of course, the latter could not be attacked without marching through the former without aid. You couldn't bring an army through another person's kingdom.
Yeah, you couldn't go against the kingdom you wanted if you had to go through somebody
else's kingdom to get there, right? Because he would get attacked twice, right? So you had to make, what do you call it?
Alliances.
Political alliances,
Right.
yeah, government alliances or and war alliances or whatever, right? So,
You can't get what you want if you don't align with.
so if we go back, if we think about it, Ephraim was one of the tribes of Israel, originally, the ones that came out of Egypt, right? The kingdom of Israel was often called Ephraim, or the kingdom of Ephraim, in the same way as the tribes of Judah and Benjamin were called the kingdom of Judah, right? Two distinct areas, okay? The phrase "is confederate" is in Hebrew. It means resteth on, or under ordinary circumstances, the kingdom of Syria and Israel were hostile to one another, and we're not going to read all these. I just put this in as an example, right? Kings. First Kings 5.
One of them.
Yeah, do
15,
one of them.
20.
Yeah.
Ben-Hadad agreed with King Asa and sent the commanders of his forces against the towns of Israel. He conquered Ion, Dan, Abelmeth, Makkah, and all Kinnereth, in addition to Naphtali.
Naphtali, right? Naphtali, right? Do you remember that there's later on everybody wonders what happened to the tribe of Dan?
Mhm.
It completely disappeared. It was absorbed.
So something like when they went in and they killed all the men, and then they took the women and children.
And they took everything.
They took everything.
Ceased to exist now. Right? And they were bakers. They weren't
I knew it. Ephraim was one of Joseph's sons.
sons, yes. The one that wasn't Benjamin.
So those were, it was Manasseh and Ephraim. So one
Manasseh,
of these,
yeah.
Manasseh
Mhm.
and Ephraim. Ephraim was, so
Yep.
Ephraim,
Right.
their kingdom was
Warring-
half Egyptian,
Yes. Half Egyptian.
half Israel,
Right.
blessed by
Joseph
Joseph,
and Joshua.
Jacob,
Jacob, who was his father.
no,
Or
Joseph, his grandfather.
his grandfather, yes.
And was Ephraim the younger or the older?
He was the younger.
So he's the one that got the name Blessed.
Yes. And was given lots of territory when they settled in Israel. Or the promised land. It wasn't even called Israel then. Okay. So, but all of First and Second Kings is about that. How it's laid out. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah.
You'll see it's like it's just this is this territory and this territory and this territory and then now they're fighting against each other, right? Because what did God do? What did he tell Isaiah was going to do? Remove the protections. Well, that's the peace and the tranquility between the tribes. You maintain your peace and tranquility. If the 50 states aren't in unison, we're not a nation. Does that make sense? Right? So, all right.
Or we're a nation, we're just not one
Is
nation.
it under one
We're
nation?
not one nation under God.
Yes. Right. So, the key phrase out of that verse is, and his heart was moved, namely the heart of Ahaz and the heart of his people. They were fearful. They were looking at these armies coming from two different sections, right? Rising partly from a consciousness of their own guilt, because Isaiah had been telling them, right? Whereby they had put themselves out of God's protection, as well as from the consideration of the great strength and power of their enemies. A town, even as large as Jerusalem, think about it today. If you took all the towns surrounding Phoenix, I mean, you'd clear out to
Arlington.
Arlington. No, I'm talking about the other way.
Ahwatukee?
Tukey, that way, Black Canyon, all the way south, right, and Tucson, and we all gathered together, and we were going to go against the town of Phoenix. they couldn't protect themselves. Phoenix doesn't have the resources or the capability to take on that massive number of people. I'm talking about Goodyear, Peoria, Salem City, all that would be going against the city of Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's happening here. But they never united in a mass. It was only one or two at a time, and they just never. You're not going to.
They were not organized.
They were not organized. Thank you. Right?
And they weren't aligned.
And they weren't aligned
So if you don't, because you couldn't go through one kingdom if you didn't have an alliance with
with
them.
another. Right.
Even though all these kingdoms were brothers.
We were brothers originally. Yeah. And they still fought. What did they do to Joseph? Anyway. Okay.
Sounds like they had some issues.
Issues, right? Okay. So.
Needed family counseling.
Now, the phrase here I think is pretty cool is that was moved as the trees of the woods in the wind, right? This is a very beautiful and striking image. We've all seen trees that are just blowing in the wind. You get that, especially a willow.
Yeah.
All right. It's expresses universal trembling, consternation, and alarm of the people as the trees are moved together when the wind passes violently over them. So, when the message was brought to Ahaz, it spread like wildfire through the people. And they all became very panicked and fearful. That's all that means, okay? So let's go to verse 3. Oh, yeah. I like this part. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go forth now and meet Ahaz, thou and Jezhub. Okay, Jezhub. Okay, thy son.
So Isaiah's son.
Right, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the fuller's field. All right, now, when it says, then the Lord said unto Isaiah, the prophet, the inspired penman of these prophecies, that go by his name, what follows, the Lord said unto him in vision or by an articulate voice or by impulse of his mind, but we're informed, but was given directly to Isaiah, right? In other words, God spoke to him. I don't know how he heard him or how it occurred, but he had a clear message, right? So I put a note there. If you notice that it says Lord is in all caps, right? And sometimes you see it in small caps. And the large Lord reflects the original term Yahweh, meaning demonstrates God's self-existence and self-sufficiency, creator, the I am, right? And it's found 6,823 times in the Bible.
Is him speaking directly and not through a messenger.
Not through a messenger, right? Or, yes, it's directly, basically, right? While Lord, the standard capitalization is the English rendition of the Hebrew word Adonai, which translates as master or ruler, and it's only used 400 times in the Bible. Okay, so when we're talking about him and his covenants, his rules, the 10 Commandments, we would say it'd be a small capital L, small O-R-D, right? But when he speaks, it's big letters, like, his presence is in charge, right? The creator of everything is talking to you, right? So it just so that you know who's talking, right? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So it says, go forth now and meet Ahaz, right? Now, God is saying, though he, King Ahaz, did not ask or send for you or listen to you as he should have, the prophet was in the city of Jerusalem, right? We know that because he was visualizing at the temple, correct? Mm-hmm. Right? And he says, get out, go forth, means get out of the temple, get out of the city, right? And go to Ahaz. And Ahaz was without, or outside of the city, as it appears by the place after mentioned where he was to meet him. This is the imminent instance of preventing mercy, right? And it says, thou and Jezhub, thy son, whose name signifies the remnant shall return. Isaiah's son is named that. Amazing, isn't it? His son's not young. He's already into his teen years. But he was already named what God had promised Israel. And he actually ends up there in the remnant. Okay. Anyway, that we're left to the former devastation by those two kings ought to return to the Lord by repentance, whereas the people of Judah should thereafter be carried captive by the Shams, yet a remnant should return. right, or return again, he returns, and we'll see him later on in different chapters. Okay, but anyway, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool. Now this is pretty amazing. You know, he says, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool. That's pretty specific, isn't it?
Yep.
Reservoir that feeds all the water to Jerusalem.
Right. There's two pools, right? One's called the lower, and then there's the king's pool above, right? Anyway, he tells him exactly where the king is at, where he needs to go.
Where they changed the enemy.
No, Ahaz.
Oh, Ahaz.
Yeah, he's doing a survey of the area because anyway, we'll get into it. Right? He says at the place, it is possible he was examining to see whether the fountain could be stopped up or the water diverted so that could not be used by the enemy. When you are going to be besieged, besieged,
Right.
you need water to survive, even if you have to wait it out, right? If they have the water, you're in trouble.
Well, yeah,
Right?
but if you also dry up, well, so if they can't get water,
They can't. They have to find water themselves, right? They
Right.
can't stay. So he was assessing that situation, right? Okay, where is it? Okay, so that they could be prevented from maintaining a protracted siege, right? And in 2 Chronicles 32:4, note proof that God knows all and where you are at all times.
Mhm.
He knew exactly where. And oh, by the way, I didn't do the last part of that too. The conduit. I will in a minute. 2 Chronicles. You got that?
I can.
Oh, I think he's already in there.
No, it was,
Oh,
Second
There we go.
Chronicles,
I
32:4.
will tell you this, that I have
32.
4. Yeah.
somebody said that they were drawn to buy
got
a
it,
gallon
or-
I
of
got it.
milk
okay.
and then take it specifically to this street and specifically to a specific house.
Yes.
And go up and knock on the door, and the woman that answered the phone,
By the door.
the door,
Right.
had small children. She had nothing to feed her babies and had been praying.
Hmm. That happens a lot.
So
People-
yeah, he can tell you exactly
To the
to the house.
to the to the exact
Where
door.
to go.
Yep, it's pretty
From
amazing.
here, right here.
So there was gathered much people together, who stopped all the fountains and the brook that ran through the midst of the land, saying, why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water?
Again, it shows that they were thinking like, okay, they can't fight if they don't have water.
Mhm.
They were also probably trying to downplay the wealth of the land.
Yes, that would also do it too. It would look barren, wouldn't it? As it dies out, okay? And it can be rerouted into
Because
the
how
city.
long is it gonna take this army to get there?
Oh, it's not a short walk. Yeah, it's going to take probably 2 months, 3 months for a complete army to
It's
move
not
that far.
another 40 years around the mountain.
Right, that's true. It's a short period.
But it's not enough time for them to dig a canal.
Right.
A pipe in the ground.
Right.
But it is enough time for them to cut off the water and make it look barren
Yeah,
there.
move the water
Move
somewhere
it,
else.
right.
Maybe
You
dig
can divert
another, another holding spot
Yes.
in the city.
Inside the city, right, okay. So, the conduit, it's an aqueduct from the pool or reservoir from the supply of the city. At the foot of Zion was Mount Silo, right? And we can read that, but it's just, all the Isaiah and Nehemiah and John is mentioning the same water supply.
Yep.
Okay?
Because they use the same ones over and over.
Called also Gihon,
Yep, I remember.
on the
Gihon.
west of Jerusalem. Remember that? That was where the Jesus met with
Yep,
the people that crawled up to try to get in when the water was activated or by the angels or
yes.
for healing.
Mhm.
Ta-da! Same fountain. Okay, by the
And
way.
the one guy could never get there in time.
Right, and Christ healed him anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Right. The two pools were supplied from it. The upper or old, and that's Isaiah, or the kings, which is in Nehemiah, which is the one that's referenced above. So there was a kings, there was an upper or kings, which was the old original, and then there was a lower one built later, and which received the superfluous waters of the upper. So one spilled over into the other,
Yeah.
right? The upper pool is still seen today about 700 yards from the Jaffa Gate in Jerusalem.
Still there.
It's still there. Never stopped flowing.
Wow.
The lower pool was destroyed in the war,
Mm.
but the upper one still goes, right? That's pretty amazing to think about it, right? So, in the highway of the fuller's field, in the place occupied as a situation on which to spread or suspend cloth that was bleached or dyed. So they would use the second pool to dye the clothes because it wasn't being used to drink. or to cook with or stuff like that, right? And it would then, and the dye and stuff wouldn't hurt the fields, it would just go on out and water the fields, and it would be absorbed back into the ground. Does that make sense?
Kind of like
So-
gray water.
Like gray water, yeah, it's like a gray water tank, okay? So, that highway, I think I got it over on the side, it says, yeah, this area would have been chosen because much water was needed in bleaching or dyeing cloth. The name highway denotes the public path or the road that led to this field. Fuller's Field, Fuller's Highway, and God even named the highway, or the road, the path that everybody would have known.
Great.
I'm like, I think he might be in charge, right? Nothing slips through, right? Then said the Lord, unto Isaiah the prophet, did spark. Back to the beginning. All right. 4, there we go. Verse 4. You got it with me here? Okay. And it said, and say unto him, take heed and be quiet. Fear not, neither be faint-hearted for the 2 tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and the son of Remaliah. Right? Now, this is specifically what God told Isaiah to tell him, to Ahaz, the king, right? Now, when he said, take heed and be quiet, the fears of the king by words of comfort. The right temper for such a time was one of calm courage, waiting on the Lord. And we find that in Isaiah later, in Isaiah 30.
Not fear.
Faith, not fear. That's what we've been saying all along, right? Don't let fear overtake you, because you can't think straight when you're fearful, right? Now, when it says neither be faint-hearted, literally, let not thine heart be softened or afraid. Strengthen your heart up. Be strong, right? And for these 2 tails of these smoking firebrands, these are examples of the 2 powers that King Ahaz dreaded, right? In other words, the Syrian and the army of Israel coming, Ephraim, right? They're coming. He was afraid that God calls them 2 tails of the smoking firebrands, right? Actually, that's an insult, right? But as the stumps of 2 smoking torches, that's what he's calling them, right? Their flame was nearly out, and it would soon be extinguished. That definitely would change your mind as king, and you got the prophet of God telling you this, right? You think it might convince you that it's not going to be as bad as you think? Yeah. Anyway, so the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and with the son of Remaliah. This shows that who were met by the 2 firebrands, Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, king of Israel. The reason they call him the son of Remaliah, there's a touch of scorn in the omission of the king's name. They didn't call him Pekah, did he? Right? The example is when men spoke scornfully of Saul as the son of Kish, and that's in 1 Samuel 10:11. You're in Samuel.
1 Samuel.
Yeah, 1 Samuel 10:11. I think that's what it is. Yeah. You're in 8.
I'm in Isaiah.
Samuel.
Oh, you're in Isaiah. Okay. I thought you
No, I follow along in
Okay.
Isaiah.
All right. Thank you.
Where's 1 Samuel?
1 Samuel 10:11. I don't know. It's in my book over here.
Got 2 Samuel. Oh, there it is. 1 Samuel 10,
11, yeah.
verse 11.
Yeah. And then,
And it came to pass, when all that knew him before time saw that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets. Then the people said one to another, what is this that is come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets?
Saul was trying to change, and he was going against God's commands, and God let him go crazy, right? And he's speaking out loud, and he's saying he's in control, and that's what that's about. Okay, so they call him the son of Kish, which was his father. They didn't even call him Saul. That's an insult. In the Hebrew language or Hebrew people, if you call him, if I was to say, Sherry, the daughter of, I wouldn't say Sherry, I'd say the daughter of Jerry or the daughter of Pat, right? I'm like, oh, that, you don't even know my name? You can't even talk to me?
Like
Right.
what the kids' friends do.
Yeah,
Oh,
Right.
you're Tanya's mom.
right.
Oh,
Right.
yes.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Yes.
That's what's going on, okay?
I don't know who you are, but you're Tanya's mom.
Yeah, but this is what God's saying.
Yeah.
God is personally insulting these two guys.
Gotcha.
He's like, you're not even worth
You're
your
saying your name.
Say your name. It's not even coming out of my mouth.
Right.
Ooh.
That's bad.
Not a good day.
So obviously their name is not in the book.
Nope.
Yeah.
I think you got it right there, right?
I can't say it, and the name is not.
Not
there.
in that book.
It's not written on his hand.
Right? So, but we've seen that also when Saul did called David the son of Jesse. It was an insult to David, right?
Saul's anger flared up at Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse and rebellious woman, don't I know that you have sided with the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of the mother who bore you?
He was.
You son of a perverse and rebellious woman."
She must have been a.
I know what that means.
And God said it. Right?
It's a very elegant way.
Yes, isn't it? All right. Because it pointed out that the fact that the king's name is Pekah, P-E-K-A-H, was after all but an upstart adventurer who had made his way to the throne by rebellion and murder.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a bunch of countries we've been battling against, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Gulf War over that one. Anyway. All right, now, verse 5, it says, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, wow. So he lays it out here, doesn't he?
Mhm.
Right? I put in here that, please note that these three were not three parties in the council and confederacy against Judah, but only two, right? Syrian Ephraim, right, or Israel, and the son of Remaliah is just an insult to that king. The two parties, the Syria and the Ephraim.
Ephraim, and you know that other person.
Yeah, the other one, yeah. It was definitely an insult, right? So, the kingdom of the Syrian Ephraim, also known as Israel, and this king of the former Syria is not mentioned at all. Not once did Isaiah say his name. It was put in later so we would know reference to who the time period was, right?
Mm-hmm.
Later, only if he was the son of a private person, which is purposely done by way of contempt and not worthy of a title even.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. It's like, that's bad.
No notice.
Yeah, right? Delete my notice. I'm not going to be here long, right? So they have taken evil counsel against thee, saying, this is expressed in this next verse. So we'll talk about this evil counsel, right? It says, verse 6, it says, let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabel, right? Now,
So so continuation from 5.
mhm,
Aram, Ephraim, and Remaliah's son have
Right.
plotted your ruin, saying, "Let us invade."
Weren't successful.
right,
So now these three faction alliance, and now they're going to go take out Judah.
yes,
So they probably have a more strategic location to launch, because Judah is probably now saying, "No, we tried that, it didn't work."
right. You got it?
So they're just going to keep trying.
Yes,
Okay.
because what they're looking at is profit
Yes.
and the power and the
they
control.
have to go through Judah.
Yes,
And if Judah's not all in, it's a political war.
it's
So
exactly.
now if they take over that land,
Yes.
it's risk.
It's risk. It's just risk.
So now you go make alliances with people you're just,
And we talk about that in here,
so you
right?
can go get Australia.
Yeah,
And
right.
they're already choosing who they want to put as
Yeah.
the
First country to
king.
get.
Right,
If he owns Australia, wins the game. Man.
right. I know it, right? So let us go against Judah. We will march against Judah and terrify it and conquer it for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't
Great
even ask for
strategy.
alliance. They're just going to go take it,
Mm-hmm. Agreed, man.
right? And when they say and vex it, the word means to throw into concentration or fear, or by besieging it, it weaken its defenses, right? And then it says, and let us make breach therein, rather cleave it asunder or destroy its fortified areas, so they can't fight against you, right? The scheme was to divide a large portion of the territory between themselves. Now that you know these other two had already made this deal, right? It's a political agreement between two kings, right? The same word and phrase was also used in 2 Chronicles 32:1, but
Like leave it asunder, is that what you're
yeah,
talking about?
yeah. No, make a breach therein for us.
Breach would be like a small hole in a big wall,
Yeah,
so that you could pull your forces through and they can expand.
and exactly. So they're going to look for a fortified area, probably through a mountain pass, that they can overwhelm, and then they can pour
They
through.
have access.
Yes. right? So that's what that's about, right? It's part of the political talk associated with the royalty. That's what this let's make a breach, you know, it's like make an agreement so that we'll seize this area and take it and destroy it, and then we'll have a passageway through, okay? And then they set a king in the midst of it. It's a tributary, make it a tributary to the allied kings of Syria and Ephraim, so it could be controlled by them without them having to be there. If they've set up the king, who's he responsible to? If they put him in the guy that conquers,
Yeah,
right?
the three groups.
The three groups, right? So, the last portion of this verse states, even the son of Tabel, right? There they determined to enthrone a man named Tabel. And it's in Ezra 4:7, is written Tabal. Here in passing, a name that is similar to the Syrian name, Tabrimon. It's, I can't say it in Sumerian, right? Or Assyrian. Nothing is more is known of this person. He might have been some disaffected member of the royal family of David who had sought the aid of Rezin and Pekah so that he would come into power over the people. So he's a prodigy of the line of David, and he wanted to control it.
I can do this.
I can do this. I can
You
run the
give it to
kingdom.
me, I can do this,
right?
I'll prove myself.
And I'll pay tribute to you. That's what it comes down to, right? But after this,
And they wanted to go in and get the spoils of war. Really what they wanted is they wanted the ability to be able to go through it
yeah,
to get where they wanted to go.
right.
And
Also conqueror
so if they put who they wanted in
in charge,
place,
right? They'd
they
always
could
have access.
control who they wanted to put
Yeah, this says
in place.
set this guy up as a puppet king.
Yes, it's a
Yes.
puppet.
Yeah, then they could control him, and then that way they could always come in and get what they want and do what they want.
And not have to
And they
pay.
probably only ask him predetermined questions.
Yes.
And he probably has a little thing, someone whispering in his ear to tell him how to answer
Well, it's a
the
scroll.
questions.
It's already written out.
Yeah, it's already written out.
Yeah,
Don't deviate.
Just
You
from
make
the
me
script.
Try to think on
Yeah.
my own.
Right.
And he probably has mental issues.
you might.
He probably
Well,
does.
if he's already disenchanted and he's not been put into any place in power, and he had to go to 2 foreign kings to get in there,
But even these 2 kings didn't
Didn't.
mention him by name.
nope.
No, they just said the son of his
So,
dad.
Yep,
so he wasn't even worth their time.
he was expendable to them.
Yes, and he was expendable. He was expended.
But he's a nice man.
He's a nice guy.
No, he actually, he's not a nice
He's-
guy, but he's controllable.
He's controllable. That's the key word right
The
there.
puppet king.
The puppet king is back. All right.
So are we going through 7?
It's
The last one.
No,
No,
there's
no,
no,
there's
seven,
8.
eight.
but
It's
Mine
short.
ends at 7. Oh, 8. I'm sorry. It's a mistake.
let's see.
This many fingers.
Okay.
Let's see what 9 is.
It's only this much page.
I know.
So, I was thinking just because
It changes. Yeah.
Because at 7 is when it says, but the Lord says.
Right,
Right,
7
let's
is
start
a
there.
good stopping
We'll
point.
start there next week.
Yeah.
Next week, okay. I think that's cool.
What is
I'll give you.
next?
I got next one here.
Next week is August.
Because after 9, then verse 10 says the child Emmanuel
Yes.
or the sign of Emmanuel.
Right.
Next week is August 4th,
4th. Yeah. Just before we leave.
The first
the first Wednesday.
And that I'm sorry. We'll talk about it afterwards.
So there will be Bible study.
Yep. There will
Yes,
be Bible
there
study.
will be Bible
One
study
note,
next
please
Wednesday.
people come to the food bank because we only had 3 people this Monday.
Really?
Yes.
Well, I don't ever see it on the Tonopah community thing or
Yeah.
nothing.
We can put it out.
Yeah.
We'll
Well-
definitely broadcast it Sunday.
You should have your daughter go on Facebook.
To the high school, only 3 people went to the high school?
No, to
Oh,
The other
that.
one.
Bank.
the one on Indian School.
Yeah. On Monday.
You should have
They
Shelley put it
they
on
have
Facebook.
shut down the one on Monday now. So we're only doing once a month at the high school on Saturday.
Paper.
So they're not even doing the one on Monday anymore? As
No,
of what,
because
last
school's
Monday?
starting.
As far, yeah.
Yeah, because
Okay.
Because the school's starting.
So now it's just gonna be the
Which doesn't
Saturday.
make any sense because they don't have school Monday.
They're off every Monday.
Yeah. So if you people don't complain
Yeah. We got to start getting people.
Right.
or start coming or.
Yeah.
Well, it just may be that this community is really blessed right now.
I don't know.
Or they
Well, I
can't
need
get
to go
there.
up there.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the other one. You need to.
That was what
I
I
need to
said.
go up there.
If people have to work if they only got one car,
Yeah.
and you're open on a Monday, how do they get there?
Right.
And we're not open on an evening, we're not open on a weekend.
It's just
Right.
wrong scheduling.
It's
I would
Right.
guess if it was open on Monday night or on Saturday, you'd probably get more
They'd
get
people.
more people.
Yeah, I've told them that, you need an evening, you need a weekend.
Yep. I would.
Yeah. Doesn't matter, but at least if it's one evening, maybe twice a month.
They could even get more volunteers if they would do that.
Yes,
Right.
Yes.
Because the volunteers
Especially
are the ones who
Saturday.
work.
yes.
It's not, that's not the one sitting at
Right
home.
now, we're down to 2 people,
Oops, sorry.
so,
Well, let's pray.
yeah.
Lord Heavenly Father, Lord, we thank you for the discernment of this Bible study, Lord. We thank you that it's showing and opening our eyes to prophecy that's taking place today as well. We thank you for that, Lord. We ask that you be with us as we travel home this evening, and just let us keep our focus on you and you alone. And we say all these things in